Peace, everyone. I am Gali Tayyib, and this is QuranOmics. Today's subject is about Imam Alshafi'i and how he founded or established a new religion in the name of Islam under the new name Sect, Sunni Sect. The traditional Sunni Islamic religion. That has nothing to do with Prophet Muhammad. Hijack, just the name, the background, the Quran, what they're really following is this man's ideology, this man's plan, this man's outline, and how he formed, chopped up the verses, twisted the meanings of the words, established his own creed, and it's very tedious, but we need to get out every information, every little detail, because everyone who wants to understand in Islam, the true Islam, or how it was twisted, needs to know, will rely on one detail or another. So this is basically about the transformation from the Islam of the Quran to the Islam of Hadith. We're going to go on like part one. The beginning formation of the false Sunnah religion. Now, before Imam Shafi'i, there was Imam Malik. And Imam Malik was, have it on a note here, he was born 711 Christian era, which is 93 Hijrah, Islamic era, and born and then died 795 Christian era, and died, that which equals to 179 Hijri. And after that came Abu Shafi'i. He was born 767, died 820. In Hijri, in Islamic calendar, equals to 150 Hijri to 204, and he died in 204 Hijri. We're going to come back to that later. But Imam Malik was before Imam Shafi'i, and he established it, but not in a way that up to the satisfaction of a Shafi'i, because no one has done what Imam Malik has done. He's gathering all the ahadith and the saying. He gathered it in a book. So before Imam Shafi'i, there was Imam Malik bin Anas, and he wrote a book citing the deeds of Prophet and people of the Medina, trying to combine or clarify the teachings between what has been said and practiced. Because talk was getting out of hand between what is right, what is wrong, or holding on to what the Prophet was doing as a guideline. So he used to narrate opposites, or more correctly, contradictions in hadith, and what Prophet said, what the companion said, what the people used to do, and all that, according to what he heard from the people of Medina, because he was relying on practice more than saying. People of Medina, on the authority of the messenger, such as common things, urinating standing, urinating sitting, or kissing while fasting, eating with the right hand or the left hand, or other daily life chores. He says the people of Medina and the Sunnah, as in what is commonly known amongst us, amongst the people, in which there is no difference to us, and which I heard from the people of knowledge. And once again, he ends it with, in our country, in our region, in our area, in our tradition. And other times he perfectly says, I like this, I prefer this, this is better, I think this is nicer, this is not. And he always puts his opinions in. And with this, Malik opens the door to opinion on the widest scale without being restricted to it. So basically, he would then take a stance then contradict it or leave it open for challenge, creating conflict. Not in conflict as in wars, but conflict as in what is right, what is wrong, according to whom. Also, in his first edition of his book, Al Muwatta, the supported, he narrated thousands of hadith and during his lifetime eliminated them to the point he had only a handful of them. When a conflict ensued, or when in a conflict in narration ensued, or contradicting itself and needed to be picked over the other, a comparison was made, not between the two sayings, but it turns into verifying the narrator's personality to verify the validity of his experience, and the text was no longer as important as a bond, even though the text or what they're arguing about is a fact. You know, like if someone says the sun is yellow, and the other one says the sun is blue, they're not gonna say, okay, logical, the sun is yellow, so we're gonna reject the person who says the sun is blue. No, we have to verify on top of that the person who said it. So, and sometime because the person saying the sun is yellow is a commoner, they're not going to take his word for it, or because his background is somewhat mysterious, or no one knows anything about him, so or no one can verify him or anything, so they just reject him and they'll take over this person's, the other person's, because he has higher status, or he prays, or he does the rituals, or he's a known man. So it turned into the person, the narrator's personality more than what the subjects are about, even though it's something logical. So it turned, that's how it started turning out, because everyone is objecting. So they jumped, they left the subject and they started paying attention to who said it, and they verify him. So if he's good, then whatever he says is good. So these persons become prophet and God or whatever, you know. That's how it's just ridiculous. So to go on, even so the word sunnah was a colloquial word that belonged to the companions and the followers, or the general community in their work and their consensus. It's what everybody does and practices in everyday's life. So Umar ibn al-Khattab has a sunnah that he was unique in, not that he invented it, or because he carried it out, so he was unique in it, even though he's the first ones to say in the Arabian Peninsula to establish jails. So that doesn't mean jails wasn't anywhere else. I mean, there were jails anywhere, but in this particular part of the land, he's the first to establish. So it was a sunnah that he took from somewhere else. And so in a way, it's reviving a way of a line in a way of life, you know. So he brought something over from, let's say, the Persian or from the Roman, and brought it over to the desert, and he had the first jail. So there it is. So that's like a sunnah, but it's not copyrighted to him. It doesn't belong to him, but he just, to that community, he revised, so he has a sunnah. He's unique in something. So Abdullah bin Abbas has a sunnah in what he does, and Abdullah bin Mas'ud has a sunnah, and it's something that he's unique in. In other words, it's a way or a deed that defines them, as so it was not tied to anyone until a Shafi'i came and linked sunnah to the personality of the Prophet and surrounded it with a wall of holiness. So we said that sunnah was a common thread in life, that everyone carries out his own little things, his own little deeds in life, and it was something that's natural, and no one really copyrighted it and said No, now it belongs to the Prophet Muhammad, to this person. And that's what the Shafi'i did. The concept and reference of the prophetic Sunnah, according to Malik, is a follower, companion, or what commonly people practice. But according to Shafi'i, it is purely prophetic. So now, Imam al-Shafi'i, the true founder of traditional Sunni Islam religion. Among the mistakes of al-Shafi'i is that he was a poet, and poets have four fatal mistakes: filling, imagination, tandem, and line. So in filling, he could say what he wants to say in four rows. Let's just say four sentences, but he has to do it with 20 or 25 just to say what he wanted in the four. Imagination, going out of bounds, um, illusions, tandem, repeating it. Let's say does not care. Like if two words, let's say using different between father and dad, or between Satan and uh, being bad. He just, as long as the words rhyme, it doesn't matter what words he choose. That's what we call tandem, taraduf in Arabic. And you see poets use that, all the time, because their lines has to rhyme. So in Arabic they do that. So that's one of the fatal mistakes. And lying, poets always lie, because we have a phrase that says the best of poetry is the one with the most lies. And most of the time they take and they cherry pick what they want when they're poetry. They focus on one little thing, and regardless of fact and reality, they just cherry pick what they want and drop what they want, and just so they could form a picture of what's appropriate to them or their goal. So the entry of al-Shafi'i and his weak argument: everything that the Messenger of God enacted that is not in a book, and what we wrote in this book of ours, his book, from mentioning what God has given to the servants of learning the book and wisdom, is evident that that wisdom is the Sunnah of the Messenger of God. Page 32 of the message. And with this unexpected shock and synonymity in wording and meaning, and a confusion between wisdom and the Sunnah, because that's what he used. His first attack was on the word hikmah, wisdom. He was tying the word wisdom to Sunnah, and soon the meaning will be replaced. So, and it is an argument that will not have the power to convince unless it is derived from the book of God. And he singled out a statement for it called explanation of God's obligation in his book to follow the Sunnah of his messenger. Now, where did he get these ideas from? He cherry picked seven verses from the Quran, and pushing aside around 14 or 28 or more. So he mentions 7 verses. He cherry picked 7 verses because these verses was for Prophet Muhammad. Was talking to Prophet Muhammad. These verses are the cow, chapter the cow, all the chapters, and then the verses. The cow 129, cow 151, Al Imran 164, Friday verse 2, cow 231, woman 113, parties 34. And Al-Shafi'i continues, because the Quran was mentioned and followed by wisdom, and God mentioned it to his creation by teaching the book and wisdom, so he did not find, and God knows best, to say wisdom here except the Sunnah of the Messenger of God. So here, Al-Shafi'i concluded that because God taught the Messenger Sunnah, the Al-Hikmah, the wisdom, He assumes and translate that this must be the sunnah of the prophet, and this whatever the prophet did was the right way. So make we cannot mistake that al-Shafi'i, the author of the book The Message, that's the name of his book, The Message, his first book, who insisted in advance on this synonym between two words, wisdom and the sunnah, twisting one to fit onto the other. Sees his argument that the Quran verses came 7 times in conjunction with wisdom that can only be alleged sunnah. We notice the other synonymy where he mixed between the book and the Quran as being one. And this is not logical, as the Quran is not necessarily the book, but the Quran is part of the book. We note that Ash-Shafi'i deliberately did not mention the rest of the other 24 verses that contain the word wisdom, because he was cherry picking, and there are 8 other verses that Al-Shafi'i deliberately did not list because they include the rest of the prophets and non-prophets like Luqman, Al-Hakim, and Idris, Ar-Rajul al-Salih, as in, for examples, in chapter Al-Imran, in verse 48, wisdom is a distraction back to Jesus. In table 110, addressed to Jesus. Al-Imran 79, meaning Jesus. Al-Imran 81, people of Jesus. Woman 54, Al-Ibrahim, Jathia 16, children of Israel. The cattle 89, chapter 89, verse, chapter, the cattle, chapter, verse 89, the people of Abraham and the people of all the prophets, including Muhammad and his people. So we see that the word wisdom in the Quran was used as any other word. There's nothing big secret about it. It was used for Jesus and for people of Israel, and just whenever is needed, because wisdom, everybody knows what wisdom is. Although Shafi'i emphasized the Arabic of the Quran as that only Arabs could understand it, he was the first to break this rule by establishing his foolishness, ignoring that if the structure changed, the meaning would change also, and his ignorance that the Quran's tongue is free of synonyms and that God is more accurate than what he imagined in his creation and speech. Al-Shafi'i here forcibly reconstructed the concept of religion, linking the absolute book of God to what is relative human, and transferring the source of the religion from the book of God to the so-called Sunnah, the person of the messenger, and the jurist leading it on behalf of the messenger. There is nothing in the Arabic tongue or any dictionary that indicates that wisdom is the Sunnah or vice versa. And if we were to call wisdom on something, it is on the book of God, because it is its home and he is the wise. And wisdom in the language of the Arabs, wisdom is worship about knowing the best of things with the best of sciences. And quantity and wisdom are among the best of sciences. And wisdom, knowledge and jurisprudence and justice, and al-Hakim, the scholar and the possessor of wisdom. Al-Hakim, the scholar and the possessor of wisdom. And he has judged, an example, became wise. And the word sunnah is originally the way people generally conducted their lives, and it is not always the praiseworthy way, but it enters into the good and the bad. It is well known that the word sunnah in the book of God is the sunnah of God that has no transformation or alteration, or the Sunnah of the ancients before, and it's told under a group of Quranic stories to take a lesson from them. So I have to say this: when you read when anyone reads the word Sunnah in the Quran, it's Sunnatullah. So, and he's talking about Sunnatullah, the way of God's way towards the people, the way He had the people conduct each other, the way He wanted life to be, uh, positive and negative, uh, up and down, right and left. It has to be a mixture in life. So whenever God mentions Sunnah, He always talks about God's will on earth. Every time He talks about Sunnah. Now, anytime He talks about, when He talks about a specific person, the Quran, let's say He talks about Abraham, let's say He talks about Muhammad, or He talks about a specific group of people, or changers, he doesn't say Sunnah, He says Iswa. And that's just, you follow the sentence, the word, and follow the sentence. So when every time He says Sunnah, لَقَدْ كَانَ لَكُمْ فِي رَسُولِ اللَّهِ إِسْوَةٌ حَسَنَةٌ, when He mentions the person's name, is talk about Iswa, never Sunnah. And when He talk about itba', following, there's always two choices between following the good, the bad, the right, the wrong, and so on. So there are no synonyms in the Quran. There's always, you just have to read what's before and what's after and analyze the verse. So Al-Shafi'i's dedication to the concept of the Sunnah as a legislative source became the legislator and the legislation, judge and executioner, the first outlet for the book of God, and the backbone of the rulings, prohibitions, analysis, and fatwas that it entails after it. So Al-Shafi'i distinguishes and invents the terms of a book that is followed, the Quran, and a book that is not followed, the Sunnah, the actions of the Prophet, and synonyms, synonymous with them, and interprets the Sunnah as symbolized by an unwritten revelation performed by the Prophet, from which he entered that all the actions and words of the Prophet are revelation not followed. So, in other words, he was saying that the book has revelations, that's, and the Prophet also has revelation, because the Prophet must reflect the teachings of the Quran as and executing it to the fullest. Then what the Prophet did, it must be part of the Quran. So that's where the Sunnah becomes like, it became a reflection of the Quran, which was a bad mistake. It was a big mistake, because he didn't go back to the other verses, because he chopped up another verse to break away from the original meaning, and he twisted it. And that's gonna be coming up soon, because like I said, there's no synonyms in the Quran, but he made the synonyms, he avoided the synonyms and mixed them all together to his liking and cherry picked, and that's what he did. But we're gonna get to that soon. In the book of the Message, the Shafi'i's first book, Shafi'i explicitly avoided saying the word revelation, because it was too early and too much for the people to handle. And he will make it clear in the second book, the Mother, that's the second book. But he is currently in the book of the Message, and he used the word casting in horror, in Arabic, Ilqa al-Raw, the book of the Message. This is in the first book. And he recited in the splendor of everything that he enacted, and his Sunnah was wisdom. So it was what he cast in his splendor as his Sunnah, and it is the wisdom that God mentioned, page 88 to 103. Trying to give you references of what he said. Follow up In the book Invalidations of Appropriations uh, from the Book of the Mother, the messenger of God never gave a chance to anything except by revelation. From the revelation, what is recited, and from it is revelation to the messenger of God, so he will be reconsidered by it. It has been said, unless he recites a Quran and he was alive. Now, these are all scribbles, what the Shafi'i was writing, and we're trying to give you the top lines, and anyone could go back and try to read the book, but you could take this as a reference or read the whole book for yourself. In fact, Al-Shafi'i was not the first to baptize the Sunnah by revelation, for he was preceded by people of Hadith. And Al-Shafi'i mentioned three of the sayings in his book, The Mother, in the book of marriage. But despite the fact that there were precedents over Al-Shafi'i by saying with revelation, their words are considered mere scattered saying here and there. But had it not been that Al-Shafi'i established it in a coherent theoretical body and became the founder of a new Islamic religion, just as Paul the Apostle founded a new religion called Christianity. So let that sink in for a moment. Al-Shafi'i was the maker of his time, more than the son of his age, in dedicating the Sunnah as a revelation, comparing the two tablets of the Quran and making them the legal quorum in the reference as in the authentic. So some people the word wahi, revelation, was thrown around, but it was just mere word. But the Shafi'i, he established it. But we want to note that when we talk about Al-Shafi'i's writing, we should be very careful. Al-Shafi'i did not write. He didn't actually write it with his hand, but rather dictated. Al-Rabi' bin Sulaiman narrated from him as Al-Umm, and Al-Buwaiti narrated, or so it is said, and the other narrator of these two, despite their fame, was by listening and was by transmitted by listening. The oldest manuscript copy of the treatise, which is attributed by permit, that means a Shafi'i validated him and validated these two, and so they became how in today's time they'll say autobiography, authorized autobiography of what this person says that is 100% true. So it was the same, almost the same way. Bears the date of 265 after Hijri. That is more than 60 years after the death of Al-Shafi'i. That's when it was first written down, the copy actually written down. But just like these guys were like walking books. Shafi'i said they're 100% they're authorized to say what the Shafi'i was telling them. The books of the Shafi'i met with a violent clash with the Mu'tazila, and they are a group based by their opposing group based by having a logical thinking approach, which were completely liquidated after several centuries of hunting, killing, condemning, shaming them, and it is difficult to determine their identity now, except for a few, which today can be called the Quranic people, or the people who follow the Quran. Those who consider the book alone, without the so-called Sunnah attached to it, as the only reference in the divine statement. So these people did not believe in something called a Sunnah, or a co-author of the religion, or a co-god of the religion, or co-founder of the religion. They did not believe in this. It's just strictly the Quran. The difference, what it will come in future updates. We explain the difference between what God actually said, Iswa, good exemplar, not Sunnah, but they twisted that also. Al-Shafi'i included in the book of collecting knowledge an explicit reference to them and the response to them in chapter on the story of the saying of the sect that rejected all the news, in example, the hadith. Al-Shafi'i does not hesitate to stress, deny, falsify it on any hadith uh, and its narrator as it seemed to him, as if it were invalidating his claim. So even though a hadith is authentic, but this hadith actually threatens his new founded religion and his new belief, he'll attack it in which way. So as we said, it's cherry picking. His hypothetical interlocutor, basically, he was the Shafi'i when he wrote this book. He was talking to himself, so he was having an interview with himself. So, as we said, his hypothetical interlocutor. You have to excuse my stumbling. Basically, he was talking to himself, questioning and answering. So when you read the book, there was no other real person there. It was just him talking, making up the questions and answers. And the book of the message, all of which are based on a formulation about a hypothetical dialogue between a Shafi'i and his imaginary interlocutor, asking him, commenting on his thesis, saying the Sunnah. This is supposed to be the Mu'tazila, the opposing group. The Sunnah is nothing but the highest of the Book of God. And the Sunnah is nothing but a follow-up except to the Book of God and similarly to its revelation. He asked him, this is according to me, as I described. I open an argument for the one who narrated the Prophet said, whatever comes to you on my behalf, submit it to the Book of God. Whatever agrees with it, I said it. And whatever contradicts it, I did not say it. This is the opposing party, Al-Mu'tazila, telling the Shafi'i that this hadith, what do you say about this hadith that the Prophet said? Anything that goes along with the book, whatever agrees with it, I said it. What if it doesn't? I do not agree with it. Al-Shafi'i response was vehement and violent. And he says, no one narrated this proves his hadith in something small or old, and this is a narration that is cut off from an unknown man. We do not accept such a narration in anything. Page 224, 225. As we say, which we said before, the validation of a hadith is not of what the subject is. It's about who narrated the hadith. So the hadith could be truth, but if he don't like the person, he could invalidate the hadith based on what the person was doing, or because he was drinking, or he's an unknown or shady character, or just anything like that. So even though if Shafi'i accepted this hadith, it would ruin and dismantle everything he's built, everything he's done. So he had to attack it. So it is not difficult for us to realize that Al-Shafi'i did not reject the hadith because it was cut off from the narration, how much he himself argued with correspondence and interpretation. In fact, even when Al-Shafi'i collides with authentic hadith based on his own policy that refutes his claim about the divine source of the Sunnah and affirms, on the contrary, its humanity and the humanity of the messenger emanating from it, he does not have a way to circumvent its contradictory content, leading with the explanatory mind, which is a mind that controls the theory cognitive. So basically, there's another hadith that blows the Shafi'i theory out of water because he's saying that the prophet is divine and whatever he says must be from the Quran. So if a prophet says now this opposing person party, a Mu'tazila, uh, asked a Shafi'i a question and gave him another hadith, and we'll hear it. In the same context in which we find Al-Shafi'i confirming that the Sunnah is a divine inspiration or a revealed revelation, or at least a statement about a revealed revelation, the hadith placed on the tongue of the Prophet is mentioned. So I judge, the Prophet is saying, so I judge for him in the manner I hear from him. So whoever I have decreed for him something from his brother's right, let him not take it, for I cut him a piece of fire. He says, then the messenger of God, that his rulings are based on the apparent words of the two opponents. Page 156. So he's saying there's a hadith of the Prophet saying that I only judge by what I hear. So if someone was slick-tongued, like he has a slick lawyer, and he got over, and he won, and I judged for him, let him know that I cut him a piece of hellfire. So, but then the Shafi'i added that the Prophet said, sooner or later, it was said that that when it comes to this, to judging, God only gave the Prophet the power to judge on what's outwardness. That's it. So there's no doubt that the judging, the outward and the apparent, is the only ruling that is available to humans. That's why in every case we need witnesses, we need facts, we need evidence, because we just can't go by saying we don't know what's in the heart. So we have to have apparent proof, evidence, and so on. Because God alone, according to the Quranic text, the knowledge of the unseen and knowledge and the secrets of men necessarily leaves the door wide open to human error. So how can such a mistake be attributed to divine inspiration, Prophet Muhammad? So Shafi'i was stuck. So he was getting stuck as he was going along, but he was deliberately putting these questions in his book so he could get around it. And it's like saying when you tell a lie too many times, it becomes the truth. So in fact, the hadith, the other hadith, I am only human, whose chain of transmission and narrators are numerous, and all of them are authentic according to the conditions of Al-Shafi'i and the conditions of the two sheikhs after him, Bukhari and Muslim, which exceeded 65 hadiths in the 9 major blogs. Altogether are only evidence. He was decisive. He was decisive, not on the necessity of collecting, but on the necessity of differentiating between a book whose source is divine and a sunnah issued by the messenger in terms of human being. So also in several other hadiths in which the messenger acknowledged that he is like other human beings. He may make a mistake in judgment and estimation, and he may even judge unjustly, no matter how hard he seeks to investigate, because he, like all other human beings, has not been given him to judge except on the outward rather than the inner. There's no room for doubt that those 65 hadiths that Al-Shafi'i cited in the first place draw a major question mark about the claim of the author of the book of the message about the revelation of the Sunnah. The messenger is a human being like us. He walks the markets and eats food, except in the exception of the revelation. But the question is, when the revelation is cut off from the messenger for periods that may reach a month, sometimes, what is the condition and lifestyle of the messenger in this case without revelation? If all the actions of the messenger are a revelation, how do you prove, apply, and explain the sunnah in the absence of revelations? In other words, if there's no revelation, would the prophet stop? Would he stop and not do anything until like he's working on Wi-Fi or something? That's the whole idea he was working on. Is it the sunnah of the revelation or the sunnah of the human being? And how do we differentiate between them? The sunnah became a book with the book and was surrounded by the aura of revelation that surrounds the revelation, because the Shafi'i stripped the book of his holiness, of sacredness, and wrapped it around the sunnah. So the sunnah became the gateway or the doorway to the Quran, because God cannot speak to us, but he spoke to the Prophet Muhammad. Therefore, whatever Prophet Muhammad did, not only in delivery, but in actions, becomes the key to the Quran and to the whole religion. So now, we do not find an analog of this reversal except in the 4th century with Christianity witnessed. When the Roman Empire was Christianized, Christ was installed as God, as a God, its son, sharing in the essence of God the Father. But the Islamic version, instead of following the person of the messenger, was devoted to the divine source of his sunnah, or his word, according to the Christian expression, the logos. And this was the maximum that could be accepted by a religion such as Islam, that was based on monotheism, abstract. But in Christianity, based on diagnostic monotheism. That means in Islam, we couldn't go higher. The Shafi'i couldn't go higher to worship Prophet Muhammad as the Christians did to Jesus. You couldn't do that. He couldn't go that far. So he had to stop there and invent the Sunnah. For the words that was in the beginning and was God is the one who became human, according to the famous expression of John the Evangelist. So up to here, this is just the first part, and it's a little complicated, but as we see that it was all based on the Shafi'i inserting his own words and meaning and twisting the verses and chopping them off, and he wrote 2 books. So the first book was laying the foundation, and that was written in Iraq, but he became famous not for the first book, but for the second book, because in the second book, the mother, he really explained and flourished and expanded all the ideas that was like in the shells in the message Risala, because he had to change a lot of things, because the was written in Egypt and Risala was written uh, in Iraq. So there was too much competition, and a lot of it was hard for people to accept it, because it was too hard for the people to comprehend, the common people, because the idea was new, but the scholars understood it. But he moved to Egypt, and that's when he changed and explained and started to make it real easy with this new ruling. And that's where the message became what he's standing on. And we're going to go through all that, and we're going to go through the people who followed his book and built the same way the Shafi'i built his book and his belief on twisting and lying and deceiving. The other people, scholars, came along after the Shafi'i and built based on what he did and what he said. And you can see lies were built on top of lies, and this is how it became. So this is for now part one. It's a little bit long, but I'm doing my best and I get better as I go along. So thank you for following, and we'll see you again. I am Qadi Tayyib. This is QuranOmics. Thank you for watching.